Hi everyone, it's Hudson Henry, and I'm really excited to be back doing another Perfect Inspiration episode for OM1 about my trip last summer to the wild southern coast of Olympic National Park. It was an incredible 4-day, 3-night trek along a really gorgeous stretch of wild Pacific Northwest rainforest and coast with my good friend Andy Adkins, who's just an incredible videographer. And we created some on location videos and just made some beautiful stills and had a fantastic time in the woods and on the beach. And today I want to really focus on an image that I created the very last night that we were camped out along the coast. This is at a place called Mosquito Creek, and there's this gorgeous head that sticks out into the ocean right there just south of where we camped. And it was obvious as we were hiking towards it that this was going to be the first night that we had a clear sky and an ability to hopefully capture some Milky Way images. And I want to just talk a little bit about how I approached scouting for this location, setting up, shooting the shot, and then editing this raw file that I captured with my D810 in both Adobe Lightroom and in Perfect Layers 9 and Perfect Effects 9 to quickly just give it that punch that I wanted to really capture what was out there that night. But first I want to talk, like I said, just a little bit about the setup, how we got to this location, how I approach doing a star shot, and just the day that we had on the coast that last day. I'm going to go into the grid mode in Lightroom, and you can see I'm in a blacked out mode. Lightroom has this neat way to just focus on the images and not on the software, where if you use the L key, it cycles through completely blacked out, normal, halfway dim, completely blacked out, normal. It's just by cycling, pressing the L key. For those of you who've been watching my Perfect Inspiration episodes, this may be old hat, but my general workflow is to start with my images in Adobe's Lightroom 5 and organize and do my raw adjustments, my basic raw edits to the image in Lightroom before finishing them in OM1's Perfect Photo Suite 9. So here we are on the beach at Toliak Point on the third morning of our trip, and that's Andy taking a little nap after breakfast. He got a little tired of me running around shooting dawn that morning. And as we started on our way south towards Mosquito Creek, I wound up seeing this gorgeous heron that morning sitting out on a rock. And I always try to travel with my gear really accessible. So I had my lens kit on the top of my pack really accessible in an F1 hard bag that I just place in the top of my big backpack, and I had my camera in a holster just ready to grab and shoot. And it really benefited me because I was able to just quickly drop my pack, grab the long lens, and shoot over to photograph this heron that was on the rock. And when he spooked and started to fly, I got a really nice image that I just love. And as we were hiking south down the coast, we saw that the clouds were really starting to break up, and I was excited that the weather report that we'd had showed that we were probably going to get a nice clear night that night to maybe do some star photography at Mosquito Creek. So I was already starting to kind of get the wheels turning. Tonight's going to be a star night. And we had to cross a couple of headlands and climb through some rough stuff. Here's Andy with all of his gear squeezing through a tight space up a steep slope. And up and down some rope ladders as usual. And this stretch of coast has some really rugged trail. It's fun to drag a ton of camera gear up and down terrain like this. When we arrived at Mosquito Creek, I immediately began looking for interesting looking terrain that would look good with stars as a backdrop, things that I could silhouette or maybe get a little bit of starlight reflected off. And I started playing with this headland, and you can see this is an interesting example of just how slowing your shutter speed down can really improve some images. And on this one, I'm shooting here at f8 at 125th of a second, and then I slow it down with a neutral density filter. I was using a Stingray variable neutral density filter, and just slowing it down to a couple of seconds, you see how everything smooths out. You start to get the reflections in what used to be just turbulent water. Now it's all slowed down and smooth. It's still not a great image, but it's just interesting how slowing that shutter speed down can really improve your shot. Now here I'm starting to get something that I like a little bit more. This is a 10-second exposure. You can see how the ocean's really blurred, but I still wanted to have a little bit of that action from the waves. So I actually went down to just shooting this at f16 to really get the everything in focus from the foreground to the background. I was using a Zeiss 35mm lens, and I captured this at a half a second. I really wanted that same kind of shutter speed that I used for waterfalls to kind of blur what's happening around this rock as the wave washes in around it, and I kind of timed the shot for as the tide was washing in. And really, this is my favorite one, you know, and this is just playing with basically the same scene, honing in to where you find a little bit of foreground that's interesting, to play between the midground and the background, and then play with your shutter speed, play with time a little bit to let motion be an element in your image. You can really see a progression here as I'm really out just scouting, and then I think, well, I could make a nice image out of this, and I'm just playing around, and then I really get to where, you know, I'm happy with this image, it's fun. And in the process, I noticed that over here in this area, there was just a ton of bird activity. So, of course, you know, being the curious soul that I am, I hiked over there and found that it was an area just filled with cormorants. It was this interesting cormorant rookery, and the rocks were just coated in cormorant guano. And once again, I used the same effect. Let's slow down the wave action a little bit, have the ocean be this thing that's in motion with the spray up on the rocks, and I got a really nice vertical and horizontal composition. And I'll tell you, this is not the product of just snapping photos, you know, a couple of photos and being gone. This is some patience, because I'm trying to slow the wave action down and get an interesting kind of smooth sea surface with some spray from the waves, shooting this at 2.5 seconds and trying to also get the birds to hold still for that long a shutter speed. This is really the product, a couple of images out of 100 that really worked for me, and I like that one in particular. So then, as evening wore on, we were getting ready to kind of cook dinner so that we could be ready to shoot stars as the sun set. And it was not, because often clear nights aren't, it was not an epic sunset that evening. But I really loved this giant stump that had washed up. It clearly had been something from logging long ago when they were doing the old growth that had washed down from the headlands and lodged here, you know, been washed up by the tide. And, you know, this is such a huge object. This is an example of sometimes you really need a human being or a recognizable object for scale to show just how grand something is. So in this case, I just left my tripod set up and put myself in the image, because Andy was actually back setting up camp and getting something to eat on the fire for us. So I just really love this image. It was a beautiful kind of way to break up a dull sky by throwing this big tree into the middle of it and putting myself in there, let us see exactly how big it is. You know, and here's another example. This is not obviously an award-winning photo, but we stumbled upon this just giant jellyfish during the day that had washed up on the beach. And I could take a photo of this and you wouldn't really know if it's the size of a bottle cap or a Volkswagen. So, you know, every now and then, if you want to take something home to really impress your friends, stick your own foot in there to get a sense of scale. And we ate dinner and hung out by the fire, and it was just a really beautiful evening. We talked photography and reminisced about what a great trip it had been. And I used the last bit of light to set up my my composition with my tripod, and then wait for it to get totally dark to create this image. In order to do that, I'm going to flip from Lightroom's library module over to its develop module, and I'm going to turn on a set of flagged photos in my library filter, in my Lightroom filter. I'm only going to look at these flagged photos that I've got set up to kind of discuss how I did my raw edits in Lightroom. And this image is a single Milky Way shot. A lot of times I'll take photos of the Milky Way in two images. One taken just at dusk, a bit underexposed to get the foreground at a lower ISO, and then wait until long after dark and shoot the sky at a higher ISO and then blend those two images together. In this case, I had a number of compositions that I was excited about taking with the Milky Way, and this was not the first one. So this is a single image Milky Way shot. And I'm still going to process it as two separate images. And the way I'm going to do that is by creating virtual copies in Lightroom to edit one for the sky, one for the foreground, and then blend those in on one's perfect layers, which is a really easy way to blend two images. Virtual copies are one of my favorite features in Lightroom. They let me create a virtual copy of my master file, or multiple virtual copies of my master file in this case, to edit differently than that original master file, but they don't actually create a new physical copy on the hard drive. Both of these point back to that original master file in my Lightroom catalog. So here I'm able to edit one for the sky, edit one for the foreground, and then export files to blend in Perfect Layers. In this case, they'll be Photoshop documents to blend in Perfect Layers 9. And to create these virtual copies to work on is very simple. In the Mac, you're going to control click. On the PC, you'll right click and just choose Create Virtual Copy. Now, in this case, I've already created a couple of them. Let's have a look. This one's for the foreground. And this is a problem that I've been having with the latest version of Lightroom. I'm actually going to jump into the loop view of the library so that you can see what this image is really supposed to look like. If I jump back into Develop, you can see for some reason, after I've been doing heavy noise reduction and sharpening as I have here, it's just simplifying the view of it for some reason. So I'm going to talk about what I did to these images in the library mode and then show you what my settings were in Develop. So in this particular image, I have gone in and really boosted the exposure and the shadow detail and gone in and had done really heavy duty noise reduction in order to sort of smooth out the really noisy underexposed foreground. And you can see in the original file it's really necessary. Whereas on this image, I've gone in and just added a bunch of contrast to the sky and done targeted noise reduction and sharpening for the sky, which doesn't need as much because it's a more detail-rich, complex scene and the noise doesn't stand out quite as much. So let's have a look at my Develop module settings, and we'll start with this one that I did the foreground work on. And we'll zoom in to 1 to 2 and jump into the Develop module. You can see I boosted the exposure by a full stop. And I reduced contrast because a lot of the details in these shadows are very close to black, and if you boost contrast, it's just going to smash those shadows into the blacks as it tries to separate them from the highlights. I've done a little bit. I've obviously boosted the shadows quite a bit here, and I've pushed the blacks up a little bit to get more detail out of these dark areas. And again, here's this just terrible view of it all kind of crushed. And then when it comes into the detail, I have done a lot of noise reduction. We're up to 87 on the luminance noise reduction and 44 in color noise reduction. And you just move those sliders to taste. You play with it. You can see if I back off, it gets noisy really quick. I'm gonna Command Z or Control Z to undo that change. Rainbow wheel. There's a lot going on in this D810 image. Even in my Mac Pro with 32 gigs of RAM, things slow down a little bit as you get to this level of editing. And then I've done quite a bit of sharpening to pull detail back after that noise reduction. And I'm not going to go through a full level discussion of noise reduction and sharpening, except to say that they're sort of two heads of the same coin. Once you adjust one, you need to play with the other, and it's kind of this seesaw balance until you get the look that you're going for. So I'm going to go back into the library module where we can really see what these images look like. Oh, I'll show you once again the Develop module here. We'll zoom in so we can see what it really looks like and check out just the basic settings of this one. I did a lot less exposure boosting, just 25, just a quarter of a stop. I added contrast instead of reducing contrast to kind of separate the sky from the stars. I turned down the highlights quite a bit to sort of to reduce that kind of cloud in the Milky Way and make it stand out a little bit more from the stars, and boosted my whites to kind of clean up some of the stars. I actually blew some of them out to pure white so that they weren't as blue as they were in this image. And that's about it. I did a little less noise reduction and sharpening. So now what I really want to do is go back and export these two virtual copies as Photoshop documents in Perfect Layers Suite 9 in order to blend the two of them. And the way I'm going to do that is select them both, go up, click File, plug in extras, and open as layers in Perfect Layers 9, and Lightroom will build two Photoshop documents with the changes baked into those virtual copies and open them for me in ON1's Perfect Layers 9. And here in Perfect Layers 9, you can see that the layer that we've edited for the stars is atop the layer that we've edited for the foreground. So what I'm going to do is go here with my masking brush, and to start I'm going to use 100 opacity down here at the bottom, and I'm using a Wacom tablet to do my painting on this image. You can use a mouse. I love the Wacom tablet, and it works wonderfully with Perfect Photo Suite 9. So that you can see there's kind of a hard edge where I've painted more I haven't painted. I'm going to turn the masking brush's opacity down to about 33%, somewhere in there. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush a little bit, and the bracket keys on your keyboard will do that for you. Will reduce the brush size, and I'm just going to start hitting that transition edge and start kind of smoothing it into here. Yeah, and I'm going to paint up into the shadows a little bit, and I want to be careful not to cross over into the sky. And you think to yourself, well, how do you deal with this really black area of the headland? And obviously, as I'm painting this foreground image of the stars off underneath the image, the layer that has the foreground that we've worked on is being revealed. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to activate something called the Perfect Brush. That's just an amazing tool throughout ON1's suite. And I'm going to be very careful about not running this little minus symbol over into space, but I'm going to paint this area, and I'm even going to come over here to this little finger, and anything that's the same tone as what the center, that little minus symbol of my brush is touching, will be affected, and anything that's a vastly different tone like space and the stars will be left unaffected. And look at how amazing that is. You can see it's creating a mask for me on the fly as I go. I'm just going to keep painting that in a little bit and bring that shadow detail that we worked on that foreground image in Lightroom right into here. I'm just going to paint it into my image, and look at that. Well, I love it. So now we've essentially done our blending. Lickety split, bam. And there's a couple things in here I'm not really happy about in the image, I notice, now that I have it in layers, and I'm going to take advantage of ON1's eraser tool. And I'm going to come down here and blow up my eraser tool a little bit. I think this foreground rock's just a little distracting. Maybe I didn't notice that in the darkness when I was out there shooting. And I'm going to blow up my image just a little bit. You know what? Silly me. I did that on the foreground layer, which is already blacked out. It has no effect whatsoever. I need to do this work on the underlying layer. So I'm going to hold down the space bar to get my hand tool, pull the image up, and then I'm just going to sort of erase this rock off the image. And ON1's algorithm for this eraser tool is just amazing. It is really spectacular. And I think this little blurred star from Wave Motion, I like the pinpoint star, but I wasn't real happy about that. Perfect. I'm really happy with that. Boom. So let's go back to our fit view. And since I've done this blending so quick, so easy, done a little bit of basically spot healing with the eraser tool, I'm going to hold down Command, select both of these layers, and click this, which is to merge the layers, this little command here in Perfect Layers 9. And it's going to merge those two layers, and then I'm going to take the image itself that I've just created into Perfect Effects and finish it. Perfect Effects is my favorite place to finish images and get them the look that I want really quickly after raw adjustments in Lightroom. Now in this case we're blending two different sets of raw adjustments before we get here, but now we're at the spot for me where the fun really starts. And I generally start with the dynamic contrast filter, and natural is my general starting point. Here I'm going to boost the small details to get a little more detail out of the stars, and I'm probably going to throttle back on the large details. I don't think there's that much need for those foreground details to stand out and get a bunch of contrast, or the difference between the sky and the headland are already pretty stark and dramatic. So that looks good to me. I'm going to add another layer, and this one's really my secret weapon for star photos and Milky Way photos. I like to use the Sunshine Filters sunshine setting to just make space pop and the Milky Way stand out in it. I mean, you can see right there's the effect. Now it has kind of a reverse effect of really darkening the shadows of the image. That's part of the reason why space is getting darker and the stars are standing out. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before. I'm going to run in here, I'm going to blow up my masking brush. I'm going to kind of mask that effect out of the foreground because we don't want to undo all that beautiful work that we did with our virtual copy on the foreground. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my perfect brush, turn the opacity down just a little bit, and paint it the rest of the way out of my foreground without quite affecting space. Again here, the perfect brush is just a crazy tool. Really lets me quickly and easily mask out an area of the image to take that effect that I've just put, that filter's effect, right off without affecting the other tonal areas. So boom, we have just masked that out of the foreground in a way that I like. And I'm going to go ahead and add another filter to my stack, and I'm going to go in, I think this is the finishing touch here, I'm going to go into the color enhancer and add just a little bit of fall color enhancer, and I think that that's going to make the little orange and yellow in here just pop a little bit. Boom. And that's the finishing touch for me. I just click apply, and that will save these effects. And I'm working on a smart photo here by default in ON1's Perfect Photo Suite, so I can always go back and readjust these, remask them, you know, paint the effects that we've done in and out, add more effects. That's one of the great things in Perfect Photo Suite 9 is the ability to re-edit. And I'm going to go ahead, click Save, and go right back into Lightroom so that we can see the final effect here. I love it. It's quick, it's easy. What might have taken hours in other software combinations I used in the past just took a few minutes. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit of the rest of our trip. Here's another image that I did kind of from the same location, just a little bit more ghostly, a little bit more ocean washing through. I think my feet got really wet and it was late at night, but it was a nice warm summer night. This is a rock that was right, it's a sea stack at a higher tide point, but it's right by our camp, and I just love the shape of it. And this shows, you know, a starry night image. We've got the town of La Push, Washington, adding a little bit of noise pollution. There's not much out here, but there's, you know, there's always a little source. Turning another direction, I don't like the shape of the rock quite as much, but putting the Milky Way in that image just makes such a difference. And this is kind of a fun one. This is actually lit by a little LED lantern about 100 yards away in camp. And I was wondering how much of an effect it would have. It wasn't all that visible to the human eye, but it really stood out in a long exposure image like this 30-second exposure. Here we have that sort of the same scene I shot the night before. I got up really early and I was working with the headland again, hoping for a beautiful dawn. And you can see that despite our nice clear early evening, it was quite cloudy in the morning. But I went back out and found that there were starfish out on the in the tide pools and on the rocks. And this is just a little, you know, I'm not going to go through how I did it, but I used dynamic contrast and some color enhancing filters and a little cropping and Lightroom raw adjustments to turn that image into this. So you can see what's possible in post-production quickly and easily when you combine the power of Lightroom's raw adjustments with ON1's perfect effects. It is just revolutionary for me. I get things done so quickly and get the look exactly like I want. And once again, this is another, it's a little more than half a second. It's 0.8 seconds at f11 here. Just getting a little of that water flowing through the foreground. I found this cute little baby sea star. I mean, the light was just awful, but it was one of the most adorable things I've ever seen. It's just tiny. You can see it in relation to the grown-up sea stars. And on our way out that next day, once again, I was rewarded for having my camera handy, and I have this nice 24 to 120 f4 lens. I like to carry the camera in a chest pack when I'm backpacking, just so that I can get it quick and have kind of a general purpose lens. And in this case, I'm so glad I did for the sea otter, because I wouldn't have got any shots of him if I just hadn't had that lens super handy. And Andy and I waited for the tide to recede to where we could hop around these rocks, and it was a bit hairball at times, but we hopped around the rocks back to home, and the next thing you knew, we were in the car on our way back to civilization. It was a really great trip. I'm so glad that the stars came out that last night, and I'm so thankful to ON1 for giving me the opportunity to share the adventure and my workflow with you guys through these Perfect Inspiration videos. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and can't wait to see you again.